Joining me now is the Minister for Resources, Josh Frydenberg. He joins me out of Melbourne this afternoon. Mr Frydenberg, thanks so much for your time. Now, can I first ask you about this phone call that Malcolm Turnbull had with the White House today? And the takeout there was this confidence that Barack Obama has about having the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal pass through Congress by the end of the year. But Barack Obama doesn't control Congress, so how confident are you?
Well, obviously, the President is confident, and the TPP is an important 12-nation deal representing some 40% of the world's GDP, and it's another trade agreement that has been entered into by the coalition parties after the China Free Trade Agreement and the Korean Free Trade Agreement and the Japanese Free Trade Agreement were entered into by the coalition government. And we have been entering into these agreements because Australia is a trading nation. We're a great beneficiary of exporting our agriculture, increasingly our services, of course, our resources, to the booming middle classes in the region. These agreements were out of reach for the Labor Party. They tried, they failed. Indeed, Bill Shorten was extremely sceptical about the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement.
Sorry to interrupt, but this deal is far from done, and although Barack Obama might have confidence in getting this deal done by the end of the year, we're going to see a presidential election as well, and both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton have expressed reservations about this trade deal. So is there a chance, and is the government planning, is there a contingency, I should say, for this not going ahead?
Well, Laura, the President's closer to the politics of the Congress than either you or I or anyone indeed in Australia is. And if that's his view, communicated to our Prime Minister, then that's the view that will hold. And, of course, the Americans understand the benefits that they get from such a free trade agreement as the largest economy among those 12 nations. And Australia will be a great beneficiary. And thanks to the hard work of Andrew Robb and now his very talented successor Steve Ciobo, will continue to enter into free trade agreements with the region, and we have succeeded where the Labor Party failed. And all those farmers and all those education providers or financial service providers or resource exporters who are the beneficiaries of these free trade agreements can thank the coalition, because we have entered into these agreements where the Labor Party did not.
Can I ask you about the South China Sea now? Will we be taking the United States' lead in a freedom of navigation exercise? Because the United States has done just that with a guided missile destroyer sailing very close to the Spratly Islands. Is that the right course of action, or is it provocative?
Look, we've been very consistent in our position on the competing claims in the South China Sea, that they needed to be resolved, not through any military means, but of course through the application of international law. And Australia, again, has a great interest in the stability in the South China Sea, because through those important sea lanes of communication, so much of our trade goes through. So, of course, we are a partner of the United States. We are friends with many of those countries in the region, and it's an interest of everybody, regardless of their particular territorial claim, to settle it peacefully.
This does come ahead of a United Nations arbitration ruling. In the past, China has said that even when it comes to rulings of this kind around the South China Sea, that it is not going to essentially take any notice of it. So if China continues to ignore international bodies such as the United Nations, will Australia consider taking a tougher stance, using stronger language than we have?
Look, I think our language has been very measured and considered, and it's appropriate given our position, because we don't have...
Sure, but is that language influential? Is there any evidence that it's changing China's thinking on this?
Well, I think people do take notice of Australia's views because of our position in the global strategic outlook.
But where's the evidence of that?
Well, we're engaged in very many dialogues with those regional partners, some of which are public and others are behind closed doors, and our position is always consistent, and we'll continue to make the case for the peaceful navigation of those important sea lanes of communication and the resolution of any competing territorial claims according to the rule of law and international law in particular.
Malcolm Turnbull has been named in the Panama Papers that have been released publicly this week. Bill Shorten is demanding a full explanation. Do you think the Prime Minister's obliged to give one?
Well, the Prime Minister has answered questions on that today, and there is no suggestion whatsoever that he has acted in any way but appropriately in this manner. This goes back to his involvement with Neville Wran in a company more than 20 years ago. And it's no surprise that in the middle of an election campaign, the Labor Party will be looking for a big distraction from their own problems. We've seen now 19 members, Laura, of their own party, of their candidates and members, who do not subscribe to Bill Shorten's border protection policy. In recent days, we've seen the Labor Party and the Greens having to fend off arguments that they're going to be in a coalition again, like the reckless, disastrous Gillard-Rudd years when they entered agreement into the Greens. Then today's news about the Labor Party disendorsing a candidate in their seat of Fremantle. So they've got plenty of reasons to look for distractions other than talking about their failure, both in the policy terms and to keep a united team in these very early days of what will be a very long election campaign.
Just on any deal with the Greens, seeing as you've raised the issue, would you be comfortable with Liberal Party headquarters doing a deal with the Greens in the seat of Batman?
Well, as I've said many times before, issues around preferences are ones for Tony Nutt as the federal director.
Absolutely they are, but would you be comfortable with that? Do you think your constituents, do you think Liberal Party voters would be happy to see those kind of backroom deals done?
Well, Laura, we are not fellow travellers with the Greens. That's the Labor Party, and they showed that when they were in office. And despite the protestations of the Labor Party that they won't do any deals with the Greens, history shows you particularly what happened in Tasmania, where they said exactly the same on the eve of the election, and afterward they entered into an agreement with the Greens. And we know at a federal level that's their track record too, between in the Gillard years and the Bob Brown years.
So you wouldn't take their preferences then? Well,
those issues of preferences are ones for Tony Nutt, but I can tell you the Liberals and the Greens do not have much in common when it comes to policy.
Yes, mutual interest might, though, in keeping a Labor candidate out of that seat. Anyway, I will move on. Can I ask you about the PATH program? This is a centrepiece, one of the centrepieces of the budget. The unions are concerned that it actually might be an illegal policy. But adding to that, I guess the broader question is, what safeguards do you have in place, because they haven't been articulated so far, so that businesses aren't exploiting some of these young workers for cheap labour?
Well, this is a fantastic program that's been celebrated throughout the community since its announcement on budget night.
Yes, but what are the safeguards? They haven't been articulated.
But the Brotherhood of St Lawrence has welcomed this agreement. ACOS has welcomed this initiative. And the point is 120,000 young people under the age of 25 will be helped into employment through this internship program. It will provide training, will provide extra wage subsidies. It's a great initiative involving more than $800 million worth of taxpayers' money to help get these kids into employment. And what was said on budget night by Scott Morrison was that in 2012 you had 12% of young people under the age of 15 in jobless families.
Minister,
now,
sorry to interrupt.
has to change.
I do understand that, but what are the safeguards? Surely there is a bit of a loophole here that if a business did want to take advantage of cheap labour, they could do so through this government program. So what are the safeguards?
Look, we're very confident that all the appropriate safeguards, all the appropriate mechanisms for this program to be a great success are in place.
When will we see the detail of those?
But we have advice from the Department of Employment, Laura, which indicates that this is this program complies with the law. It has, as I said, been welcomed by the community. And what's the Labor Party's alternative? They're prepared to take interns within the union movement, indeed within the Labor Party's own offices. But when it comes to finding jobs for those under 25 who don't have a job, they don't have any ideas. They're going to tell us their economic plan 100 days after the election. Well, that's not good enough. We've got an economic plan. We're rolling it out now. We made significant announcements like this in the budget, and they've been very well received because they will work and because they will provide employment to those people who need it most.
The government has lost some ground this week on trying to explain the retrospectivity or prospectivity or arguing the toss on that issue when it comes to the two-pronged super changes that also in the budget. Should the government release modelling that Treasury has done on these super policies?
Well, I don't know what modelling you're referring to. I mean, the point here, Laura, is that these changes were all designed to make it a fairer, more flexible superannuation system. And it goes back to David Murray's financial system inquiry that we set off under Tony Abbott's government. And what David Murray came back and said is that superannuation is a substitute or a supplement for the age pension. It's not about saving money to pass on to the next generation as some sort of vehicle for wealth transfer. And that's why we've made the changes. Now, importantly, among the changes that we've announced are a number of changes to improve the flexibility of the system. So 2 million people who are at the lower income end of the spectrum, they will be helped by the lower income superannuation tax offset, including many of whom are women. Other changes will allow concessional caps to be carried forward by working mothers or working fathers who leave the workforce for a period of time and then come back, or carers and the like. These are really important changes that have been championed and well received by many across the superannuation sector, and we think these policies will make for a better system, will encourage people to save, and will go back to the original purpose of superannuation as outlined by David Murray in his important report.
And Minister, thanks for your time. Over the next 7 weeks, we'll be speaking to you again.
Great, Laura. Thanks very much.
Checking in with